Hello, and welcome to our SNHU career presentation on office politics and emotional intelligence. Your experience here at Southern New Hampshire University is important to us. It's our policy and practice to create an inclusive and accessible learning environment. If there are aspects of this presentation that present any barriers to accessibility, please notify our Online Accessibility Center, OAC, as soon as possible at 866-305-9430. You can also email them at oac@snhu.edu. This video includes closed caption for the hearing impaired. Simply click the CC logo at the bottom of the video. Our career team is here to help you. If you have any questions regarding today's presentation, drop in on the Lunch Bunch, which is live every Friday at 12 noon Eastern and at 12 noon Pacific for an open Q&A session. Simply type your question into the chat box and it'll be answered by a team member live and on the spot. If you do require more immediate assistance, feel free to reach out to our dedicated team of career advisors to schedule a one-on-one consultation. Our team can assist you with everything from your resume, cover letter, mock interviews, to the job search itself. So call or email us today by clicking on the link below. Excellent. So now to introduce myself, my name is Nicole Martin, and I am a career advisor here at SNHU. I'm happy that you have decided to join us today to learn more about today's topic on office politics and emotional intelligence. As far as my own experience in working with office politics and emotional intelligence, I have a combination of formal training and well as professional experience in the industries including hospitality, accounting, fitness, and nonprofit. So before we get started, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to learn today. Our learning objectives for this webinar today are to assess areas for growth within the 5 characteristics of emotional intelligence and to set goals for improvement. To understand methods to leverage office politics and emotional intelligence, and you'll see I have EI here, I will be using the two terms interchangeably, and this is to do it in a positive manner at work. And lastly, to identify social networks and relationship stakeholders within an organization. So we're going to jump off by talking about why you need to care about it. Why should I care about office politics and EI? Why does it matter? And I'm going to tell you why. So if you're someone that tends to ignore office politics and you have a negative connotation with it, I'd really like you to consider the consequences. Consider this. Imagine being frozen out by your team because you got your work done very quickly, and guess what? You made your coworkers look bad in the process. Or maybe you worked really hard on a project and you told your boss not to take credit for it. So instead, she canceled your presentation and asked the senior manager to give the presentation instead. So you can see now how ignoring situations like these, they might help you get through a tough work day, and maybe you think it's going to advance your career, maybe avoid confrontation. But in the long term, it can really set you back in your career. CareerBuilder conducted a study of more than 2,600 hiring managers and HR professionals, and it showed that over 2/3, so about 71%, value emotional intelligence even more than IQ in their employees. 3/4 said that they'd be more likely to promote somebody that had high EI once they're in the job. Over half, which 59%, said they'd pass on a candidate with high IQ but low EI. So knowing that current employers value emotional intelligence so highly and that future employers are predicted to care about it just as much, it's really critical for job seekers today to understand that emotional intelligence really is very valuable in the job search. And it's important to take steps to increase emotional intelligence because it will help you both to excel in interview situations and on the job. So to talk a little bit about what EI is as we go forward, it's really the ability to identify and manage your own emotions and the emotions of others. And that's according to Psychology Today. And they do also note that it has these 3 complementary skills. So these are the skills attached to having a high emotional intelligence. And those are awareness, and that's both of your emotions and the emotions of others, and being able to harness emotions and apply them towards specific tasks like problem solving and thinking. So we have awareness, harnessing emotions, and emotion management. So that's both regulating your own emotions and then helping others to manage theirs. For example, if someone's having a bad day, that you have an ability to cheer them up, or calm them down if it tends to be that they're angry. So just as an example. So what does emotional intelligence look like? So as we just talked about in the definition, it's the ability to manage your own emotions and the emotions of others. So if you look at this table right here, we have it broken down between self-awareness and self-management. So those are dealing with your own emotions. And then social awareness and relationship management. And those obviously have to do with the emotions of others. So Daniel Goleman, who is a leader in this field, has identified that successful managers and successful leaders both possess a high percentage of emotional intelligence. And by successful, we think of these indicators. So that's having achieved better financial results or organizational outcomes, depending on the goals of the organization. Next, to have developed more effective and supportive organizational cultures and climates for employees to work in. Next, to have achieved higher productivity or gains within their workforce. So Goleman in his 1998 foundings also indicated that emotional intelligence contributes to 80 to 90% of the competencies that will distinguish an outstanding leader from average leaders. So obviously playing a huge role in that. So, talking about skills and competencies, what are our primary competencies that we want to gain from emotional intelligence skills? So here, if you see here, we have the list, personal competence. So that's going to include emotional self-awareness, accurate self-assessment. So those both kind of include being aware of our emotions and then being able to identify and assess where we are. And so feel free to take a look at this chart that we have beside us. It has it broken down between high, medium, and low for intensity of feelings, and it has some feelings there. So maybe if you're having a hard time deciding, I'm not sure what I'm feeling right now, so how can I even manage this emotion if I don't know exactly what it is or where it's coming from? So it has some words, associated with it. For example, if you look at angry, we see that a low form of anger, so it's still anger, would be maybe I'm resistant. Someone's asked me to do something and I'm resistant to do it. Or maybe someone's asking me to do something and I'm furious. So you'll see that's on the high. I really don't want to do it. I'm so mad. I can't believe they're asking me. And so there's some ways to recognize where you are in the scale. So nice little, table to look at there. Next we see self-confidence. And that one's pretty self-explanatory. Self-control also. So being able to control, maybe I'm furious, but I know how to control it. Transparency. So that someone is, that you're clear when you're communicating with someone and they know what you're trying to communicate. Adaptability. That's really your ability to deal with change. Achievement drive. How hard are you willing to work towards your goals and what does that mean to you? And initiative. So initiative is being able to say yes, not when someone's just asking you, but yes to yourself when you're just willing to go and do something without being asked. Taking initiative. All right, so now that we understand what these personal competencies are, how can we work to improve them? So you'll see we have it broken down here by the identifying and analyzing the emotions. So that's kind of thinking more along the chart that we were looking at there. How can I better identify what I'm feeling? How can I analyze what I'm feeling before I make moves towards it? And so we have that broken down between self-regulation and motivation. So one topic that I want to bring up as we discuss this is something that definitely got hammered into my brain when I was in college is the theory of cognitive affective behavior. And so basically it's understanding that all our emotions and our reactions that come after begin with a thought. So that's the cognitive, C. And so what am I thinking that's causing me to feel this way? That's the affect that's causing me to react in this way, the behavior. And a lot of times if you can apply that CAB, cab, think of like a taxi cab, then it's going to help you really with the identifying and analyzing piece before you get a little bit more into the self-regulation. So in his 1995 book, as we were talking about Goleman earlier, he has a 1995 book called Emotional Intelligence and Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. And he explained in the book that having high self-awareness So that's being aware of your moods as you're having them, um, is really important to increasing self-awareness. So one tool that's used for that is mindfulness. So mindfulness is focusing on the present moment. So that includes how you're feeling. And another good way to do that can also be keeping a journal. So you see these both on the list. Mindfulness, just being present in the moment. Journaling, maybe that takes you one step further. You're actually writing down what's happening in that moment, writing down how you're feeling, maybe even writing down that CAB. What am I thinking that's making me feel this way, that's making me act this way? And this really needs to be done on a regular basis to help you be able to analyze your emotions. And once you start doing it regularly, you'll actually find that you don't necessarily need to maybe journal as much as you used to, or use mindfulness as much as you used to, but it's going to be different for everyone. Good practices to include. The next is to conduct a personal SWOT analysis. So SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And chances are you may have heard that in another college class as well. It's definitely something that's brought about in higher education. And so that's basically another tool just to see where you're at. What am I really good at? What am I not good at? Even if I am good at this, what could be a threat that could get in my way of being able to perform my role or perform what I'm trying to do? And then what are opportunities? What are areas that are going to be very easy for me to excel in? So we could do that also for our personal selves, and just that learning how to self-regulate, just to work on identifying and analyzing where our emotions are at. Another tool that we could use is simply to ask for feedback. Maybe you're having a hard time with that personal SWOT analysis. Ask your boss, ask your friends, ask a trusted colleague, and just to see and find those areas for improvement. And then lastly, we have on the list is to identify triggers of negative emotions. So maybe you're using CAB and you notice, hey, I know every time that someone laughs at me, I take it very personal and I begin to get angry and I can't focus on my work. And instead of just being able to take it lightly. So maybe that's something you see as an area that you need to work on, is how to laugh with someone and not feel like they're laughing at you. All right, so we're moving on to the right list here on self-regulation and motivation. So basically, self-regulation is about being able to stay in control, learning how to lean into discomfort. Discomfort isn't something that we necessarily want to deal with, but it's going to happen in life. It's going to come naturally. And so if we can learn how to be more present in it and just lean into it and begin to become comfortable in discomfort. So to develop skills in this area, you need to learn how to manage your emotions effectively. If you often get angry, know what's triggering the feeling, as we talked about earlier. Why does this always happen to me? Why do I get angry when this happens? What's the thought behind it? So some ways that you can start to calm yourself down if you're angry or if you have an unfavorable emotion is to use deep breathing. Calm yourself down. Maybe just taking a pause before you respond to an email or a request so that you don't say something that you're going to end up regretting later. You may also notice that oftentimes maybe the trigger is anxiety or stress. So maybe finding activities in our lives that help us manage that better, something that you enjoy doing. And next, talking about motivation a little bit. So self-motivation is also strongly affected by your emotions, because if you're distracted or you're stressed, then you're probably going to find it really challenging to see yourself through the tasks that you have on a regular day. So some ways that we can boost our motivation levels is by developing self-discipline. And self-discipline requires action. So maybe that means holding yourself accountable, whether that be through a calendar, a to-do list, with a peer, with your supervisor. And then another step that you could do in that when you're holding yourself accountable is making sure that those goals are not too high, that you can celebrate your small wins. Okay, instead of, maybe you have a personal goal to, buy a house. Okay, I can't buy a house today, but maybe I'm going to start off by creating a bank account and researching properties in an area that I'm interested in. So you have a couple small wins there that you can complete, so that when you've completed them, you can give yourself that sense of achievement. All right, so now discussing the social competence. So we talked a lot about the personal competence. So we're going to move on in these primary competencies from EI on the social spectrum. So here you see on the list we have empathy. So that's being able to basically put yourself in someone else's shoes when it's not something you're going through. So maybe a coworker is going through a divorce and they're not as present as they normally would be at work. Even though you haven't gone through that, and maybe you're frustrated saying, well, we both have to get this job done. I need you to do your part. Just being able to empathize and maybe understand their situation. Organizational awareness. And we're going to dig into that a little deeper later. But that's understanding who plays what role in an organization. Sometimes you can see a clear line of power based on someone's job title. And other times, and it does happen in a lot of industries today, there's a lot more horizontal structure in an organization, and that someone that doesn't have a high job title may have influence with people of power. And so understanding that organization as a whole. Also, service orientation, your ability to basically be a team player and help out and be able to want to give back. Inspirational leadership. Again, this is not tied to a single job title. You can inspire someone and step up and mentor a colleague or a new hire, or take a lead on a project without having a high job title. So that's really just inspiring people from where you're at and leading from your seat. Developing others, and that kind of goes hand in hand with inspirational leadership. So that's going out on a limb, like we said, maybe there's a new colleague or someone that's not as competent in an area that you happen to be highly competent in, and being willing to take that time to develop them. Influence. Influence, again, don't need a job title for that. Having someone with a high emotional intelligence knows how to develop relationships and trust with others so that they can have influence on a project. Maybe you become that person that your supervisor goes to when they're going to launch something, a new project, to get your feedback on it. Change catalyst. Change is hard for anybody. Even in our personal lives and our professional lives, change is difficult. But change and innovation usually lead to the best outcomes in an organization and can really make you stand out. So are you someone that's a change catalyst that initiates change and has ideas? Conflict management. We talked about that a little bit on a personal level. So what does it look like when you're interacting with others? If you have a disagreement with someone, do you know how to manage that without having negative outcomes from that or having get into an argument? Building bonds. Creating relationships. Relationships are built through communication and trust. How have you been establishing that in the workplace? And last on the list, we have teamwork and collaboration. How well do you work with others to accomplish tasks? Are you good at collaborating with someone? Or are you someone that just wants to do everything yourself? So again, now that we've identified some of these social competencies, we've again broken them into two areas of ways that we can improve. So in our first section, we have showing interest in others. Nobody wants to spend time with someone that's talking all the time and doesn't give them a chance to talk, right? So you want to show that you're genuinely showing interest in others. And then developing working relationships. So that's taking it one step further and actually developing those ongoing relationships. And so we're going to talk about some ways that we can improve our social competence in both of these sections. So firstly, you'll see that we have embrace empathy. So as we discussed, empathy is the ability to recognize other people's emotions and try to understand their perspective. So Goleman calls this aspect of emotional intelligence the fundamental people skill. So when you hear people talk about people skills, this one's at the top of the list. So if you want to develop empathy, you can start by simply thinking about another person's viewpoint. What would it be like to be in their shoes? Imagine how they may be feeling. And really listen to them. Ask them questions. If you want to understand someone, let them express their emotions to you. Let them talk to you. And you want to make sure that if you're really actively listening to someone, which is what we have next on the list, that you need to show someone that you have their full attention. People notice that. They notice if your eyes are looking in a different direction and not looking into their eyes. Obviously not making this look creepy, but just looking at someone, that you're engaged in the conversation. And also put your cell phone down. Get away from your keyboard. If you're looking at documents, put them down. Make sure that that person understands you're not distracted in any way and that they have your full attention. And also try not to interrupt. A lot of times we're just waiting to speak when someone's sharing something. Sometimes you just have to let someone talk. It's not a time for you to share something that's similar, to talk. Sometimes people just need to speak, and that actually helps to develop relationships. And you can often tell if someone is interested in having a conversation with you, or if they're receptive to your active listening or to maybe even what you're saying by their body language. So look at someone's body language when they're talking to you. Are their arms crossed? That's usually a sign that they're feeling closed off to you. Are they looking down or away? Then they're probably not engaged. So definitely important to start looking at someone's body language, or maybe they're really fidgety, their hands are moving. That could mean they're stressed. It could be stressed with something else going on. It could be stressed with their conversation about you. But taking these little seconds to really go a little bit deeper into the way we're communicating with people can go a long way, and especially it does help us build our emotional intelligence as well. So also, when we're talking about, focusing on showing interest in others, you want to make sure that beyond looking at someone's body tone, body language, you want to make sure that you, when you're speaking to them, also speak clearly and in an appropriate tone. So you'll see we have those on the list. So speaking clearly shows that you're engaged in the conversation. But if someone's mumbling to you, think about this for a second. If someone's mumbling and you can't really hear what they're saying, would you think that they're very interested? So you want to make sure that you're really enunciating and train yourself to speak slower. So sometimes we can get, especially if we're excited to say something, we can get to speaking very fast. And so you want to make sure you're speaking slowly, that you're using inflection in your voice, again, speaking in an acceptable tone, and that you are really engaged in the discussion. Another thing to keep in mind when we think about tone is the volume of your voice. Are you speaking very loud in an area that it wouldn't be appropriate to do that, or where there's people around you trying to focus? I know we've all done that at some point before, but something to be mindful of. Or maybe it's the opposite, and you're speaking too quietly in a really quiet tone. So it is important to take notice of how you and your colleagues are communicating, and maybe that means following suit and just kind of understanding the area that they're at. And lastly, you do see on the list that we had maintain eye contact. And we did talk about that one a little bit. And I get it. The world is distracting. Phones are distracting. We're constantly bombarded with information everywhere we go in this tech world today. It's a fast-paced world. But it's really important to keep that little bit of humanity that you can. Give someone the time of day that they deserve. It's very important. And just because you're maintaining eye contact doesn't mean you can't blink. So again, it doesn't need to be creepy. And next, now, as we talked about showing interest in others, we're going to talk about developing those working relationships. So just remember, you don't have to be a natural people person or outgoing to develop better social skills. Social skills can be developed by anybody. They may come more natural to some people, but there's always skills that are going to come more natural to some people than others. So really, in developing relationships, and I know I said this earlier, but it's key, you have to develop trust. Trust isn't built overnight, it takes time. So building trust and rapport with people is really essential. And part of that is not shying away from negative situations. Remember we talked earlier about leaning into discomfort? Well, that's also part of dealing with conflict. And knowing how to go through a difficult situation with someone. And that takes communication. So you have to be working on a relationship. You can't, just because there's an uncomfortable social situation, doesn't mean you should back away on it. And that goes next to building confidence. You're going to find that it's much easier to communicate with someone or go through a conflict if you increase your self-confidence. So to do that, maybe that means starting off, if there's an area that you don't feel confident, working to build your skills in that area. Or maybe that issues goes a little bit deeper and you just haven't really had a time to feel confident. So slowly look for opportunities that you can practice these skills. Maybe that means attending a conference on behalf of your team, or, joining a meetup in a hobby that you enjoy and meeting new people. Oftentimes these small activities really start to build up to the larger wins for us and teach us how to build relationships. Another key factor to remember is that you want to be assertive and not aggressive when you are working on these relationships. So it's good to have your own opinion. We all have opinions. But you want to make sure that you're not overstepping the line and making another person feel like they're wrong, or even worse, stupid. We live in a highly volatile political climate today. So you want to be very mindful of that and make sure that you're not offending someone, and that you know when it's appropriate to bring something up and not bring something up. Next on the list, we have choosing effective communication channels. So when we talk about communication channels, that's should I meet with someone in person or should I email them about this? And so you need to remember that if you're texting or emailing, that oftentimes messages can get misconstrued if there's not a sense of emotion or feeling behind it. So if you have a very important message to deliver someone, you always want to make sure to deliver that in person. But if it's something less important, then you can do that via email. Um, and that's also the appropriate action to take because you don't want to intervene on someone's workflow either and the way that they're trying to manage their day. We all have high workflow loads today in many of our roles. And something that kind of goes along with all of these is just being flexible. Whether it be communication channels or dealing with conflict, just making sure that in any social situation that you're in, that you have an open mind. And that kind of leads us into our next line item here that we have, which is recognizing your position. So maybe you'll feel that your way is the best way, but if you have a boss, and that line of communication isn't open, then maybe it's, okay, I'm not the one running the ship today. It's time for me to step back and wait for the appropriate time for me to share my idea. So if you don't have this accommodating attitude, you may actually in the long run miss out on opportunities to share that or have opportunities to progress within your workplace. All right, so we're going to transition here. We've talked a lot about the competencies that are involved in emotional intelligence and also ways that we can improve our emotional intelligence. But now we're going to shift a little bit onto office politics. So this is being able to identify and recognize who are the stakeholders in an organization and what is their position. So if you take a look at the image here, we talk about who is a stakeholder. So it's important to look around your organization and say, what stakeholders are involved? So you'll see here we have society. What way do we interact with society? The owners, customers, employees, suppliers, lenders, government, community. These are all people that can have stakeholder roles in an organization. Now, it might not mean that you have to interact with each of these stakeholders, but chances are a stakeholder you interact with may be interacting with one of these stakeholders. And it's important to be able to identify which of these relationships are relevant to you and which are not. But you can't do that until you know who they are. All right. So how do I know if I should be engaging with a stakeholder or not engaging with a stakeholder, or if it's important for me to develop a relationship, or how far should I develop that relationship? So here's some questions that we can begin to ask ourselves and knowing when's a good office politics situation to get into and when's a bad one. So firstly, we'll see here, is the stakeholder someone who is respected by colleagues and peers, or maybe just by one group? So if you begin to observe your office, and you should be having some organizational awareness and be starting to open your eyes to some of these relationships. So if you'll notice that maybe there's someone that's not talking to the boss, or that's, maybe there's someone that's the office gossip and they're always talking bad about someone. You can guarantee if they're talking bad about everyone else to you that they're probably talking bad about you to someone else. So that might not be someone that you necessarily would want to put a lot of work into creating a relationship with. Or taking that kind of time to hang out with, because then you might get associated as being one of those people as well. So ask yourself, is the stakeholder or someone who's respected by colleagues or peers, or are they just respected by one group? Something else to recognize, is that someone that's always dealing with just management, or are they're avoiding colleagues? Because that could be a sign too. Maybe there's some insincerity behind that, or who knows? It could not be that, but it's just things to start to observe. Next question, to what degree does the stakeholder have a fundamental impact on your organization's or department's performance? So there's another way to identify what kind of pull someone's going to have in an organization. And so again, if you're trying to recognize where someone's level of management is as well, that's a question to ask and something to look at. Maybe, you have mid-level managers and then, senior level managers and, an executive level managers after that. So think about from their day-to-day duties, what effect is it going to have on the whole organization? And that'll kind of show you their level of importance and the level of respect that you should be giving them. But then again, remember we talked earlier that job title doesn't mean everything? There could be someone that's your colleague, and you'll notice that the supervisor, like we discussed earlier, always goes and asks them questions. Or maybe every time your supervisor's out of the office and someone has to stand in for them, they pick that person. So start to have your eyes on these people, and that's part of office politics. If you want to get your boss's attention and you're new, but maybe you can't always be in front of your boss, but you know that your boss always is talking to one of your colleagues, and you begin to develop a relationship with that colleague, chances are you'll realize very soon that your opinion's also going to be valued. So it's important to see who is having an impact on the organization and department's performance. And again, maybe that's not just relationship. Maybe there's someone that always steps up and says yes to a project. So just start to notice these nuances within an organization. And then so the third question, can you clearly identify what you want from the stakeholder? And so I don't say this in a way to say that every relationship you should be looking at, oh, what can I get from them? What do I want from them? But it is kind of important to recognize that in every relationship there is some give and take. So when you say what do you want from the stakeholder, maybe they are a vendor. Because remember, relationships aren't just with colleagues and supervisors. Maybe there's a vendor you have to deal with all the time. And so what are you hoping for from the vendor? Oh, well, I'm really hoping that they're going to give us a discount because in the budget, I'm seeing that we don't have a lot of money for this certain product. So maybe you want to create a relationship so that you can start to ask them for a discount. That could be something that you want from a stakeholder. But then again, it could go the other way. Maybe your stakeholder that you're talking about is your manager. And what you want is the opportunity to develop professionally, the opportunity to maybe work on some extra project verticals, to build your resume and gain new skills. So it's really important to start to establish that because that can help gear our relationships. Remember what we said, relationships take time and you need to build trust and they require communication. And time is valuable. And so where you're spending it and which stakeholders you're spending it on, is important to manage those relationships. So maybe that question helps you show you where are you spending your time. Then on question number 4 is the relationship dynamic. That is, do you want it to grow? And that's just kind of taking step 3 one step further. So is it a give and take? Are you both helping each other? That vendor we talked about earlier, what are you doing for the vendor? If they give you a discount, are you going to continue to spend with them instead of research other vendors, right? That could be something like, oh, there's a chance that I can grow your business if you give me a little bit, right? You give me that discount. And so all relationships should be give and take. And, in any way, and again, that's not saying that it has to come from a negative place. It's just saying that in life, we do have mutual benefits through a lot of our relationships. So is it dynamic? So think of it that way. Is my relationship with the stakeholder dynamic, and how much do I want it to grow? How much am I willing to invest in the growth of this relationship, and what's it going to mean to me professionally and personally? And last question, if yes, what actions can you take today that we discussed to make it grow? So if you think back to the social competence and the ways that we can improve it that we talked about, what ways can you do that? And maybe you're thinking about it individually. Maybe you're at a job right now and you're saying, yes, actually, there's a colleague that I want to draw closer to, and I just haven't built that relationship yet. So maybe tomorrow you ask them out for coffee. Maybe you go grab coffee together before work and you can start to discuss and work on that relationship. So just think about it. What tangible action can you take in one of your relationships with a stakeholder to make it grow today? And next, we have power interest relationships. So again, it happens in any organization, and I'm asking you as we talk about office politics to try to get rid of that negative connotation because it does exist, and employers are hoping you know how to navigate it and not in a negative way. So in every institution and every organization, there's going to be some power structure. And like we discussed, that doesn't necessarily go by job title. So now we are going to talk about this a little bit. So how would someone with a high level of EI be able to report and interact with these powers? So these types of relationships with each stakeholder should be analyzed based upon their power and interest level. So you'll see if we look at this chart, you'll see that we have level of power on the right, And then at the bottom, we have level of interest. And so we're basically looking on the X and Y axis here. And this will show us, this figure does illustrate if the relationships exist based on these criteria. Those who are high on both axes should be high priority for engagement, and those who are low should be low priority. So for example, if you have someone, let's just say you're working on a project at work, and you have your colleagues that you're involved of, and there's someone that has a low level of interest on the project, and they also have a low level of power. They're on the same level as you. They're a colleague. So maybe in terms of you getting that project done, from an understanding which relationships you should spend time developing. Probably if someone doesn't have a high level of interest and they don't have a high level of power, so you're not reporting to them, that might mean, hey, maybe for right now, for this project, I don't need to work on this relationship. It's not of a top priority as far as, my office politics goes right now. But let's just say you have someone that's of a low level of interest, but a high level of power that's involved. So maybe they're not directly related to the project and it's not their job, right? It's not their job to deal with the nuances of the project. There's other people that are doing that. But let's just say they ask you to do something. It's important to keep them satisfied, right? Your job could be on the line because their level of power is high, even though maybe that particular project's not of interest to them. But if you go to that next category where we have high level of interest, high level of power, those are the people that you want to make sure that you understand. You understand their position, and that you also make sure that you're building that relationship, and that you're spending time on that and you're working to engage them. Then you'll see we also have the category on the bottom that maybe their level of power is lower, but their interest is high. So it's important to keep them informed, right? Just because you don't report to them doesn't mean you can't keep them in the loop. So just a little chart there. And again, this is not to be used in a negative way or think of office politics from a negative viewpoint, but just to understand that these do exist. And it can also help you, like we discussed earlier, to understand the way that power works in an organization and how you can leverage that. And you leverage it by deciding where you're going to engage more of your time. And now the last question exists. Where can I practice my emotional intelligence skills and my office politics skills? And so the answer to this is anywhere. Anywhere there are opportunities to engage with others, you can practice EI. It's important to remember that our motivation to learn in life is governed by our emotions. So it's really easy rather to get excited about a life-changing new skill, such as EI. But if you really want to learn it, your behaviors have to be practiced regularly so that it no longer becomes an effort or a conscious thought, but instead a successful habit. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today. Remember, if you still have questions, do not forget to follow up with the Lunch Bunch live every Friday at 12 noon Eastern and 12 noon Pacific for an open Q&A section. Thank you and have a great day.